Oh, hi there. After I'd been working at Living Computers Museum+Labs for a couple of years, I started asking myself, what are we doing anyway? Right? We've got all these working computers, and we've got a bunch of engineers, a bunch of tour guides, the collections department. But nonetheless, so I thought, well, I'm kind of academic, and what I'm going to do is go and look on the internet and see what other people are doing around their computer museum. So, particularly software. We're talking about software preservation. So I did what anybody else does. I went to Google and I looked up software museums. So, and then I went to Google Scholar and looked it up there, and WorldCat and looked it up there, software museums. And after I found a few articles, I mined their bibliographies. That's what scholars do, and I found some more articles talking about software museums. So here's some interesting quotes I found. Some have suggested that computer museums be established, where old museums would run original software to access obsolete documents. While this approach exudes a certain technological bravado, it is flawed in a number of fundamental ways, hopelessly labor-intensive and ultimately infeasible. Just as many of us who have been watching these lectures all day have seen how in this solution has ever been attempted. This for a really long time. One of some things have to break when you have this museum of computing, and maybe one of them is that you can't be playing to people who don't know anything about computers. Perhaps you have to presume a certain amount of knowledge in your audience, and that's just the way that it is. Right? There's other kinds of places that can train young people or novices on just exactly how a computer might work. People who are afraid of them could very well be well introduced to the idea of algorithms with this piece of wood exercise. But again, we've got a museum of working computers, and so we're looking at a different way, maybe a different audience of coming into it.
I can't even understand that. I'm looking at it, I read the instructions, I have no idea what that.
And one person sits on the other side. You both have the same blocks, and so you say to them, take the blue block and put it on the bottom.
Okay.
Right, and so you build a little structure that they can then copy.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although preservationists agree that attempting to keep original hardware operational will never work as a preservation method in the longer term, it is considered useful in the shorter term for evaluating the success of emulators. Now that, you do see that more and more. People are using the real equipment. I see that Yale, who is working really hard on emulation as a service, has started taking films of programs running on microcomputers in order to sort of make that the index case for their emulators. So it gives us a feeling of usefulness in the world of emulations. This is kind of interesting. This is the CDC 6500 that we've got running about 55% of the time. There's a very skilled engineer who's working on this thing all the time to try to keep it running. It's a real bear to keep running. And these are memory modules here. Each of these little guys, it's a brick about this big with 8 4K cores in there. And of course they fail. And then, so he made these emulated ones, the same form factor, the same plugs on the back, using just like a little tiny bit of the memory that's inside some of these chips. Eventually we're going to run out of working cores, and it's going to be all that. And then what, right? Then what? Then it's used up, right? It's not a permanent thing. Dennard and Lohr, now we're getting into the secondary literature. So Jessica was writing a literature review of some of this stuff, and so Dennard and Lohr dismissed the notion that a museum, and presumably any other cultural heritage institution, would actually run software on a computer. That it is, in fact, obvious that this approach would never work. So, she's leading up this project called the Software Preservation Network, which is a national project that has a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and they're looking at software preservation kind of generally across the board, and working to educate people in museums and libraries and archives to be just to create more awareness, which is really nice because archivists are doing a lot of work around this. And I've been working with the Software Preservation Network really to bring in the what we call the Middle Ages of computing into the discussion, because right now the SPN, it's really hard drives forward, or maybe it goes back as far as like the 5150 or something forward. So they're dealing with more contemporary types of programs and preserving them, and that's pretty neat. But of course, I am really more interested in the prehistory. This is a nice picture. This is our Alto, a working Alto, one of several now. So the monitor and the keyboard and the box itself and the tape drive. I'm sorry, the disc pack drive, disc cartridge drive, which is those pizzas there. And right next to it is a 3D printed Alto case, which is running on a Nook, which is just a little PC that is running the emulator that was written by one of our engineers, Josh Dersh, and they are networked together using 3 megabit Ethernet, and you can sit on the real one talking to the emulated one and play Maze War.
That's just a Nook?
Yeah, it's a Nook running an
I
emulator.
wasn't paying attention.
What's that?
I wasn't paying attention when I was there.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of detail when you drill down in there. So back to another quote. I'm afraid our library. This guy starts out. It's a pretty recent article. He starts out saying, "Well, what would we really need for the software museum? Well, we need all the documents. We'd need all the listings and printouts, papers written by the scholars or programmers who wrote it, or their oral histories." And he says, "Well, I'm afraid our library would, in the end, also have to include the real machines themselves, plus running versions of all operating systems and development platforms. Otherwise, the bulk of older code would remain incomprehensible. But does anyone have at least a minimal number of computers that ever ran at their disposal? No!" Well, at Living Computers, we say yes. We do have quite a few computers running. We've got the one supercomputer, 9 mini computers, and about 45 microcomputers, and another 7 or 8 mainframes, plus several that are in restoration. So a lot has changed since some of this literature. It's been going for the last 20 years or so. What does a software museum mean? I'm really glad that I didn't read this stuff before we started working on this project, because we're, in a lot of ways, the museum is not an academic thing, it's a practice thing. It's kind of like this place. Let's see what we can do, right? We want to make these things run and run some software on them and make them available to people to use. What does that take? So, some other places. Another very hopeful statement actually is from Doran Swait, who was with Bletchley Park and has done the Colossus restoration. Or I think it's a reconstruction, actually. Yeah.
Well, he was involved in reconstructing led in reconstruction of the Babbage engine.
Yes. That's a nice one, too.
You guys have that now. Well,
No.
It's in your country. You're part of the
Yeah,
country
it's
now.
what is it? Nathan Myhrvold has it in his front living room or something. Maybe his wife will want him to get rid of it and we'll take it for a while. But Doran, he made a really nice observation about how these projects, these restoration projects, tend not to be a part of a centralized, integrated program of preservation activity. Like there's no real national forest. Like this is everyone's cooperating together to restore this or that computer. We're starting to talk to one another and share resources and maybe not do exactly the same thing. But it's not centralized. There's no centralized body that is guiding either the restoration of equipment or the software. There's not a software catalog of everything that's out there. It's all just everywhere.
Yep.
But rather the works of a disparate and dispersed set of highly motivated individuals operating sometimes privately, sometimes in institutions which offer differing levels of welcome and encouragement. But judging by the number, variety, and ambition of restoration and reconstruction projects, the drive for such activity is irrepressible. And that you're all here is part of that irrepressible drive that I certainly find so exciting about the history of computing and our place in it. There's another one we're working on. This is IBM 36030. This is C-Cross. So it's got microcode. It's on these funny cards that look just like punch cards, except they're Mylar and have traces printed on them. And this really paid to get working, so he's got that emulated up here, and this guy, and then, of course, the memory itself, the core is in there, and he's got that emulated here. He's trying to get it work with the emulators first. If I can make the CPU talk to the emulators, then eventually we'll be able to get the other bits of it to work. So I think that's a strategy somebody else I saw earlier today is using too. So here I'm telling you, what we have at Living Computers is a museum of software, the software museum that we've been looking for, using the original computer equipment to run it on. It's not impossible. I think we've already proven it so in the last, we've been open for about 5 years now. And, I think that this place too, Vintage Computer Federation, is also doing a really nice job on it. That you can use. That's the other thing. All of this equipment is available. You can sit down at it. All the visitors who come in, they can sit down, they type away, try it out. We've got them some quick start guides so you can either refresh your memory if you used them before and can't quite remember how to get started, or if you're just fresh and curious, you can also sit down and give it a try. Program a couple things in BASIC. Make it play a little song. So, let me introduce myself. I'm Cynde Moya. I'm the collections manager at Living Computers, Museum+Labs. Living Computers is a project that it's funded by Paul Allen, who you know as the co-founders of Microsoft. It started off, what year is it? Probably 16 or 17 years ago, when Mr. Allen wanted to read his original deck tape that had BASIC on it. He wanted to get a listing off of this deck tape. And, because he didn't save the listing, and now he just got this bug in his ear, he wanted to see that listing. But of course, no place can read it and print it out onto green bar paper again. So then he bought a collection of PDP computers, mostly 8, some 11s, and a 10. A nice KL10, and a fellow who came with it, who made it work. And then this guy read the deck tape and gave Paul the green bar printout of his original BASIC. This took a while. This took a couple of years. I was first there as a project archivist, cataloging what was essentially, 500 boxes of crap, and and turning it into a valuable reference collection that could be used. It had all the cards and all the cables and all the spares and all the technical drawings and manuals, and that was really the start of the collection. The engineer made the deck tape work, and that was kind of okay for a while. And I left. Another engineer came in and just kind of kept it running. It was available online for people to get accounts. They also had an emulator, an emulated PDP-10 called a Toad, or a 10 on a desk, made by XKL Corporation. And that was also up there and available for you to get accounts on. And that kind of rolled along for a while. And there was just a lot of kind of talk. What are they going to do? And they talked to each other a lot. Finally, they decided, after 7 years, they're like, let's do it. We're really going to do it. We're going to open a museum. They hired me back as the librarian. They hired business manager, engineering manager, started building up the staff, and we just put out a bunch of stuff there and made it available.
You don't have a location up there. Where are you?
Where am I? Right here. Thank you. We're in Seattle, Washington, just south of the stadiums, in a rather industrial.
Practically next door to Starbucks headquarters.
It is next door to Starbucks headquarters.
Whereabouts in Seattle?
It's south of the stadiums on First Avenue South. So, after a while, it's turned into this whole thing, right? It's this whole big thing. There's tour guides. There's. Sorry.
Well, you said you're software museum, right? I mean, I see a lot of hardware you're showing here, but.
Well, the hardware is nothing, but a hot fan, unless it's running software.
I'll ask you a question. Are you interested in documentation on the software for one-time computer, iliac board back?
Well, yeah, that sounds interesting.
Because I have the listings of
Really?
current code that was written in 1952 and 53 for those machines.
Now, I wouldn't mind taking that, but there's also there might be other repositories of the iliac that would be a better place for that, since we don't have an iliac.
I don't know of one,
But Indiana, we could check it out. I could help you either by taking it or finding a proper home for it.
It's listings is duplicated copies of all.
Yeah.
Required.
I mean, that's a really important.
Documentation back then.
That's an important computer, the iliac.
This is the Iliac 1 you're speaking of?
Yes.
Were both of those machines derivatives?
I'm sorry?
Were both of those the von Neumann machine?
Oh, yeah.
They were both von
See,
Neumann.
what Illinois did was they had a contract to build the board back for the everyday proving ground, but they said, wait a minute, we'll build 2 of everything.
Yeah.
And so when they shipped board back iliac,
Yeah.
it was at the University of Illinois.
So yes, right. That's an interesting question. I don't have the quite answer. Are we a museum of hardware or software? Because they really depend on one another. Let's see. This has thrown me off. We don't really go back as far as that. Of course, interested in computer history, but our oldest piece is a Bendix G15D, which is a tube computer, which is getting very close to running.
There's one in the museum here, isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah, they have one too. Nice one. But it's really, it started by tracing Paul Allen's story in computing. So, how do you collect? We collect around Paul's interests, right? Because those are the things he wants to buy and see running. So, deck KA10, KIs, KLs, PDP-10s, TOPS 10, TOPS 20. We just got a Multics, which is like a precursor to the TOPS 10 operating system. We've got a nice emulator of that. We just recovered Timeshare and are working on making that available. That's really interesting. Also a nice precursor to Multics, Unix, TOPS. They got some other... So some of it is this kind of hunting down software, trying to bring it back, and some of it is running it, interpreting it. And we just recently got an IBM 7090 computer that came out of Australia. It was sitting, it was decommissioned and bought at auction by an engineer down there who was hoping to recommission it until he discovered that it would be too expensive. Right? It's like $80,000 just to build a raised floor room and air conditioning, get the power in, get it engineered. And so it sat in his pole barn for the last 40 years. And so when we took it, it's like it's covered in, wallaby poop and, kangaroo urine and, right? It's unusual spiders. So that's going to be a challenge to restore. But it's a really, the 7090 is a really interesting computer. Early transistorized thing and part of NASA trajectory. So other people, I could go through, I don't know if I'm preaching to the choir here, but there are, people often ask me when I speak, who else is doing this? I say, well, there's a lot of museums. Computer History Museum in Mountain View, most of their stuff is, it's like they don't touch it, they don't plug it in, they don't turn it on. I like that, we cooperate, we take ours, we muck around, we resolder things, we replace the germanium diodes. But they have the index copy that has never been touched. So I feel more confident in the work that we're doing. Although they have restored an IBM 1401, they do demos of that, and a PDP-1.
And the 1620,
1620?
yes, it's not on display now.
Ah,
It was.
okay. So there has been some, though. It's irrepressible. They can't stop them. American Computer Robotics Museum have some very nice pieces. I don't think they run anything. Computer Museum of America. If you went to VCF East a couple months ago in Atlanta, it was held at Lonnie's place. This will be opening in 2018. He has been working with some people to play with his stuff and sort of engineer it, kind of make it run. So there's some of the irrepressible drive there.
That sounds like the name of a museum that was in San Diego. Does this one come out of San Diego?
No, this is completely different.
Completely different.
Yeah, I think that San Diego one's gone.
Yeah.
Sort of vaporized.
Or box.
It's all over the world. Say the Nexon Computer Museum. Nexon is a company that makes games, and so they have taken some of their excess funds and made this really nice computer museum that some of it is interactive. Bletchley Park is doing some really keen stuff, especially now that they can tell us about the Enigma and some of the code-breaking stuff they did. There's the Museum of Computing in Swindon. I'm not quite sure how much restos they're doing, but it's kind of more kids, I think. They're driving kids through there and teaching them about computing. Center for Computing History is doing some very interesting stuff about restorations. You can see here, one thing they do is they've got like these consoles. That's the real console, and then it's displaying on some kind of flat screen instead of the original television set, which is one way of doing an emulation. So you can't really touch it so much, but you can touch the thing itself. This guy doing in Canada, the Personal Computer Museum there, it's mostly games. He's got a really big collection. He drives school kids through there. They all touch the stuff. It's really neat. Musée Bolo in Switzerland is also really doing a lot of keen things. They just almost went out of business. They did a big drive. A bunch of people helped fund them. They do, they have a lot of static things, but there's a lot of drive there too to do some restorations. Technium 29 is also really based on making stuff work again. Heinz Nixdorf claims to be the largest collection of computers in the world. I don't think they do any restorations there, but it'd be nice to go see it someday. Rhode Island, we're getting into more like hobbyists or collecting consortia, things that are like the Living Computer Museum 6 years ago, where we had a collection and we had some will, but it wasn't quite there. What you need for a museum is you need an executive director, and you need marketing, and you need education. You need people who want to have events, one thing we discovered right away that we weren't expecting is people want to have parties in this museum. And it's a great place to have parties, to have cocktails, you're geeky people, you know, they walk around, talk to each other, you know. I'm thankfully am not part of that, but you know. There are other people who really dig that kind of thing. So this kind of early museums, Rhode Island Computer Museum has been helpful. They've traded us some equipment to get our things running. They've got some really nice DEC computers. It's really DEC-oriented. DigiBarn in Boulder Creek, California. He's got a great big barn full of stuff, and he has taken pretty good care of it. It's kind of in plastic bins. It's not really open, but you can go and have tours. He's really connected into the Silicon Valley people, and what he does is has people come and give their oral histories in front of the equipment that they may have worked on. And he tends to have stuff with a lot of provenance, and so they'll sit down with their thing and tell about their career. And so they've been collecting these oral histories, and they're a great source of history. Large-scale Systems Museum in New Kensington. Yes. He has got a ton of cool stuff.
He's one of our members.
What's that?
He's one of our members.
He's one of your members,
Yes.
exactly. I'm sorry he's not here.
Yeah, we are too.
Yeah, so, but he's a great, really great, fun place, and he's got volunteers going there every weekend to try to restore this stuff. No?
Answer your question.
Yes, they do, I swear.
No.
So, and they're trying to make this stuff work, and they're only just starting to get school groups through to the point of like, we had this one group, you know. So, but right upstairs is what is called the Large-Scale Integration Museum, and this guy, Corey, who runs that, has micros. And he's got a better collection than me of micros, like more complete of Commodore with all the peripherals, and Atari with all the peripherals, and then the TRS-80 with all the peripherals. It's very clean and nice, and he'll plug it in and try it out for you. He's had like this one school group come through who thought it was great. So I look forward to it's big enough space. They're ready to start making this thing happen. So and they have the working stuff, the software. I just discovered this history of computing collection. This is a university department that has started to collect. So it's like maybe part of their library and archives. They've got a few things on their website, but it's a little like cool slide rule. Last but absolutely not least, of course, is the VCF Museum here at InfoAid. I'm really looking forward to taking a tour of it tomorrow and seeing what all is working here. And just like the Moby Dick he talked about, if you saw that, that was just great, the work that he's doing on that. And of course, the UNIVAC at the keynote was also really exciting. There's also these university media labs. Quite often in the media studies department, I went to a SIGSIS, a special interest group for computer information science, as part of the Society for the History of Technology back at Computer History Museum last year. And I met so many young people who were just out of graduate school, and they're teaching in media studies departments all over the place, and they're like, I'm doing games, and I'm doing spreadsheets, and I'm really trying to teach them about, early DOS programs, or really exciting to see what's going on in these media labs and how they're trying to reinterpret this stuff through the university lens. So this is different from hobbyists. There's the Media Archaeology Lab at the University College Colorado Boulder. It's been there for at least 10 years. And, they have classes every year that depend on this lab. They've got these rows of computers, and then the software, and then, peripherals and manuals. All this ready for students who are doing, and I'm not even really sure what they're doing. They're doing digital humanities. You ever heard of, who has heard of digital humanities? That's amazing. What? Maybe, right? That's the thing. Keep your ears open. That's what this is called. digital humanities. So instead of looking at computers for programming or for how they're made or their architecture, or you're looking more at, say, the history of the developers, or how exactly did the display of spreadsheets change, and how does gender influence that, right? Or, right? How does what qualities of word processing programs make possible or not possible for writing poetry in, right? So or presenting art, or how do you working with some museums, you have artworks that are dependent on, it's got to be an IBM XT running Windows, whatever that would be, 3.1, with this exact kind of monitor and this exact kind of processor. It can only be, that fast. Otherwise, it's going to be wrong, and the color will be wrong. It will not be the intention of the artist, and the emulator's not going to, right? I mean, so this is the kind of stuff they're doing. It's really cool. And it's really different from from the perspective that is here, or even from the perspective I'm accustomed to at Living Computer Museum. There's this other one, Cynde Moya, the Electronic Literature Lab at University of Washington, Vancouver. They do a lot of poetry and art, original equipment work. Matthew Kirschenbaum, he wrote a book called Track Changes a couple years ago. Have you heard of that?
Track what?
Track Changes. So it's about the history of word processing, and he looked at several important authors and what kinds of word processes they used to write their books, and how that affected the way that they wrote their books, and how he could go back in and study the way that they had edited their documents. And because if you're really going to dig into somebody's writing, sometimes looking at their marginalia is of interest. So.
Isaac Asimov's TRS-80 used to be on display here in New York.
Yeah.
There was a comic shop. I was trying to hunt it down, but the comic shop is gone.
Asimov's TRS-80. Yeah, stuff like that. I think he had J.D. Salinger's Macintosh or something. Right.
Do you have any typewriters at the Living Computers Museum?
We have a few typewriters that have incidentally came in. Some Selectrics and a couple of, like a Royal, one of those ones that you really need to bang on.
Sorry.
So then there's also emulations, right? Maybe keeping these computers running will eventually, right? Well, eventually, they're all going to die, and we'll never have the authentic thing ever again. But until then, we can keep them running in order to make a good emulation. So there's some pretty neat ones out there on the net. There's this virtual Colossus, came out of Bletchley Park. Let me see. And you can there's instructions of how it works and how to turn the dials and load programs. There's this Altair simulator. Have you seen this one? I'm going to show it to you just because it's... PowerPoint has this annoying quality of not allowing pages to be shown.
That's not a Paul Allen program, is it?
No, this is someone else.
I'm talking about PowerPoint.
Oh yeah, maybe he did design that. I'll talk to him. So this, it makes the clicky sound. So I don't have the bootloader, but you can first put in the bootloader, right? And then you deposit it. There it is. And you put in whatever the next thing in the bootloader. So it gives you.
It's not showing
It's not how
on
you
the,
you got a dual
on
screen.
the external.
Oh, see,
Yeah.
Paul, it's all your fault. that weird? Okay.
Oh, it's web page, okay.
There. So now it's on. Right, and then you pause it. Right, then you can examine it. The next one, clear it. So it works just like an Altair. It's really a neat emulator. It's not one of ours. It's somebody else's project. Ones that are ours. Any of y'all know Josh Dersh? He's a computer collector and hobbyist and engineer, and he's our engineer. He wrote the Controlto emulator, which is there at the museum. You can also download it from GitHub and try it out on your own computer. You need to find the disks to load on it, but it'll give you a good sample of, say, how to play pinball or Maze War, or how Smalltalk worked, how Bravo worked, and that starts to become really interesting in the history of computing. He also recently finished this INLAC emulator. You can also download that from GitHub. We also have the real INLAC playing Space War. You can play 3-part Space War, so with 3 spaceships. That's pretty great. Another one of our engineers wrote an emulator for Multics. So you can, and then we got this Honeywell panel, right? So this is the maintenance panel for a Honeywell computer that would have run Multics. And then Jeff Kalin, another one of our engineers, wired it in. Every single one of those white wires is wired into an FPGA, which is running the Multics emulator. So the blinky lights are meaningful. So they're really talking to you about the program that you're running on it. And that is sitting at the computer, the emulation for that. We have not brought that into the wild yet. So I think you can only use it in the museum, and you can't download it yet. But copyright things, I'm sure.
Do you encounter that a lot, just trying to get software to have on the machines in the museum? Copyright issues?
Yeah. I mean, I will get into that when I turn that thing back on. But some of it is, can we make a copy of it? Do I use the original and have a few spares? Because eventually it's going to break. Because those kids come in there, they don't know how to load a 5 1/4 disc, right? They put it in backwards or upside down or sideways, or they stuff 2 of them in there, and right? And it's really unusual the number of ways people can fail at loading a disk. So, that's certainly some of it. Making the copies with the digital rights preservation problems too. So, then do we crack it? You're not supposed to. So we struggle with exactly how to deal with it.
Aren't you well covered by the archivist exception in the DMCA?
Yes.
You are.
Yeah. So we're like one of galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. There is a good exception. The Software Preservation Network is working really hard on making that exception more of a solid thing out there. But there's still, things, you don't know who owns it, right? We've got Digital Equipment Corporation, was bought by Compaq, was bought by HP, and many, many other of these software programs. They're either totally abandoned, the company doesn't exist, maybe there's some guy who will pop out of the woodwork and say, oh, I wrote that, and you can't use it anymore, but you don't really know until you do it.
What about the early Microsoft software, like pre-PC, like the basics that was written for all the platforms? Do you archive that stuff? curious, considering
At least
all
one
hours
tape.
involved.
Yeah, we have at least one tape. We have GW Basic. We had to work really hard with legal to get GW Basic out of Microsoft. We had a copy of it. Yeah. Yeah, even though Paul wrote it, they wouldn't give it up until we did a lot of work on our side too.
So this is getting into what I'm interested in, which is the source code.
Yeah.
Is the source code for GW Basic published? Because I think that's very educational, right?
You know,
How
I
about the
know
original source code for Microsoft Basic?
we have a copy of the source. That's the one that we had to fight to get it out of Microsoft. And we should be able to release that to the wild. You know, Computer History Museum has been more successful. They got the source code for like Excel 1 and DOS 1,
Windows
APL
1,
360.
Windows 1, yeah.
Mac OS 1, Mac.
Yeah, so they're doing really well on that, and that is not,
Well, their location helps them. They're right
Yeah.
here. A lot of the people that hold the rights and will help them negotiate, or maybe the rights holders and the creators who help negotiate to get the rights out. So
yeah. You know, I mean, it would be great if we could get, you know, we've got this Multics running, can we get that source code out there? This timeshare out there, maybe get that out there. So,
Well, most of it's lost. I mean, it was on a backup tape for the cross-development system, on a deck tape, or, you know. That's the big concern. By the time you work through the legal issues, where's the software even living?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's,
Where's the source code for Lotus 123 or VisiCalc? I guess VisiCalc was good.
I think VisiCalc is out there. But
That's
yes,
but still.
I think that's right now
We had
something
we
that
had Bricklin here. He said he thinks
I
it's in
know
the
that
bowels of IBM somewhere.
Mhm.
He himself can't get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but if we have these computers running and somebody finds that tape in their basement, we can read it and
Yep.
print it out. So we're ready to catch it when they come out there, just like we were ready for timeshare. We just got last year. So
And like Microsoft has an archivist on staff. I think her name is Amy Stevenson.
yeah,
And I had tried to interact with her, or interacted with her some couple of years ago to try and get the copy of Microsoft Lyrics for Lisa, because if you install it, it comes up asking for a serial number. Can I get a license? What does a license number look like? And when she got back to me, she said, you know, the stuff that we have internally on this one package now is just lost at this point. And we ended up having to crack the software to get it to work. I didn't, someone else did.
yeah. You would think that the companies who made this had good archives, like
Yeah.
Microsoft or the Navy or Apple or something, and they don't. They too have just been like, forget about this.
Well, but like I
You know, this is
said,
the past. We're in the future.
quite often they've been bought out by another company,
yeah,
another company,
that's
another company.
usually how it ends.
Or you know, but even the companies who are not bought out have just dropped it.
Well, it's the same as
Have
the
not
motion,
thought to save
the
it.
motion picture industry. They just threw their films away. They didn't really archive them very
Right,
well.
right. Or you tape over the
It's the same
videotape of this. Yeah.
Or lost in the fire in some
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. The things that you think are ephemeral or uninteresting, which was thought of, is kind of not anymore. But so, I'm started off as an archivist or as a librarian or really as a catalog librarian. Part of preserving this software is organizing it and putting it into catalog and sticking barcodes on the things and putting them away someplace where you can find them again. Because it's not just me doing it, we've got this whole crew and we're working together. So, you know, I looked around out there. Who else is cataloging collections of hardware and software? And how do they do it? And how do they use? We started with a book catalog, so we're just limited to MARC, which is the way books are cataloged. And how do I do this? And no one else has really done it, so I divided it up in a typical way that you might think would be useful, right? CPUs, peripherals, hardware is just kind of things that aren't peripherals, like boards or cables, the software, documentation. You know, we could divide this up another way. There's the Media Archaeology Lab. Someone just wrote a paper out of there, which was so funny, and she used like Jorge Luis Borges wrote this book, this short story, kind of about the classification of animals and the way the animals were classified in this classification. Like ones that look at you funny, and the ones that look like ants when you see them from a distance, and ones that aren't part of this classification. And so then she went through the media archaeology lab and said we should have a different type of classification of these materials, right? So, ones that have keys that are really hard to press. Ones that are really heavy. Those that are, have leaky capacitors. Right? So, I was thinking, boy, that might be a more interesting way to classify our stuff. But no, I've got it really in a straight way. So, the CPU is divided. The CPU series, let me put it, we're already in small vision here. They're divided into either by manufacturer or kind of by type workstations. The realia, the peripherals, is divided into like controllers and disk drives and mouses, and so I have hundreds of these. Magnetic tape drives. So this is not a universal classification. I want to point out this is based solely on the things that we have in the collection, the things that come in. We get enough that don't really fit in, make another classification. One thing I'm working on right now is the software carriers. You can also call them obsolete media. Right? Somebody objected. It's not obsolete to me. I'm a hobbyist, and it's the real thing. So, vintage computer carriers, legacy media. I'm going to skip that. All right, so. I'm on the wrong presentation. I just want to show you some pictures. So, my engineering manager says to me, I don't know why you are perseverating on these obsolete media carriers, because the carrier is not important. What's important is, the stuff that's on it. And in some ways that's true. Once you read the stuff off of the carrier, like the deck tape, then you can use it in an emulator, or then you can rewrite it onto other. I don't know, but I don't think he's right, because we do use a lot of these vintage carriers anyway, right? We'll scrape off the 5 1/4 inch game, and then rewrite it onto new media and then take it down. So I very carefully made these taxonomy of the software carrier. So these are the major subheadings: disk cartridges, disk packs, floppies, magnetic tapes, optical storage, paper tape, and ROM cartridges. You go to the Museum of Obsolete Media on the internet. Also has some really neat categories. It's much broader. Right? This is just based on our collection.
Tape cartridges.
That's a subset.
But which category there would paper cards fall into? You have paper tape.
Punch cards?
I've got punch cards in here somewhere.
Okay.
I think they should be their own top level,
Yeah.
but I don't have enough catalog right now. Although I just recently got in like 1,000 pounds of them, so soon enough they're going to get their category. And these are disk packs, right? The 10-layer cakes, read in RPO6 things like a washing machine. You open the top, drop it in, and these RPO6s and the other disk pack things are prone to crashing, right? So we're really scared to read these ones. We've got like some old Deck 10 stuff. It could be lost forever. We're the only owner of this thing. So we don't want to stick it in there and try to read it because it's going to crash on us. So right now, one of our engineers is building a slow-speed reader, which is kind of kind of on the down low right now. We're not
Great idea.
advertising it.
A safe reader thing.
Right, so they've got like a big thing, it's gonna twirl it around, we'll read it with the magneto-optical heads that don't have to float, they'll just be like almost photographing it, and then stitch it back together and figure it out, right? So that's what we have to do to read these. And you know, ROM cartridges for games and all these different floppies. The other kinds, of course, these disc cartridges. Right, there's also these kind of tape cartridges or tape cassettes, tapes, deck tapes. There's a lot of different kinds of opticals. There's weird Bernoulli things. It's kind of like zips. So you know, part of preserving it is trying to find a name for this that everyone can agree on, putting that in the catalog, putting the barcode on it, and then eventually, you know, we can evaluate it. Which of these is going to die first? Okay, and then we can prioritize. Okay, we're going to read the disc packs. Then we're going to read all the deck tapes. Then we're going to read all the, you know. We can save some of the opticals for later.
Well, one thing that upsets me is that we lost not just the machines, but the machines that the technicians used. Disc packs, there used to be a machine to clean and inspect them, which is what you really need first. Well, where's the washing machine that they used to use?
Yeah.
Or for the tapes, there's magnetic fluid that was used to examine it. Well, I had one, but it dried up. It was, so there were all sorts of tools and knowledge about this that has been lost.
Yeah, these testing tools, like, will the manuals have enough information for, you know, a clever, interested person to figure it out in the future? Sometimes we have computers that all we have is the manuals. We don't have anybody else. So, and we've been able to figure it out, but it certainly has helped to have someone come in and say, I used to operate this Bendix G15, and let me tell you a couple of tricks. And that actually has moved the Bendix project along, just this one interview. So, we don't really have that much time, so let me take some questions.
All right, Dirk. You put a lot of effort and sweat equity into categorizing, standardizing what other museums will accept or embrace your methodology of doing this. An example, National Park Service has put out a wealth of information out of the Department of Interior on how to set up museums, how to categorize whatever it may be, textiles, whatever. In this particular case, you specialize in that sort of thing. But that museums that want to become accredited, you've got to look at some reference standard to say everybody's abiding by the same rules, so we can all commingle our information at some point in time. So, how is your standard being accepted out there in the museum community?
The Software Preservation Network has a committee called the Metadata Committee.
Okay.
And what they're doing is making a crosswalk across all software things that are being used in other different museums. So this is not just our problem. Right? So I would say we're watching it and trying to be a part of it, be a good neighbor in it, and it could be changed to accommodate other systems.
So
we're
an island.
Yes, we are an island. We're not exchanging our data with anybody else, but we're talking about it. You know, we do use Library of Congress standards. You know, these are MARC records. MARC records can be interchanged already with other people who use MARC. Very common in libraries. We're starting to use, we want to make our archival records available on Archive Grid, which is another standard called, I can't remember, but there's a descriptive standard for archival records. So I think we're trying to stick to standards. It is very important, and the standards for software is not established yet.
Somebody has turned in, been collecting calculators, desk calculators, you know, the Marchands and that sort of thing. And they've got a huge collection of those, and they've got a lot of the newer, older stuff that followed on there. So track that one too.
I will, thank you. Yeah, it's a...
There's a new one in Pennsylvania too, if you want to just have it on your radar. Professor from the University of Westchester University has opened up a building called I think he's calling it the Computer Church because it's an old church building.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so he had some impressive stuff on his personal website of what the university had, so it's probably going to be an interesting place
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly not exhausted. There's a lot of interesting enthusiasts out there coming at it from really different angles. You know, registry of everybody who has a PDP-10 or everyone's got a 360.
So maybe this is just kind of a thought experiment, but
Down in Delaware County.
like those disc packs there, that was just like a
So it's
bulk
south
media,
of
so
Westchester.
this were put on it, and now it is an object to be
It's online.
preserved. You took those bits and put them on another disc from that same box of media, and the original one was lost. Is it still the same thing? Because it's not like if it was a shrink, shipped shrink wrap thing with a label on it. Maybe that there's some specialty how that was distributed, but it's just oh, this was the disc of this dev release of this piece of software. Is
I
it
try to
preserved?
stay away from these kind of philosophical
Certainly, Mark.
of authenticity, but those are interesting questions. I think that's more like a digital humanities kind of question, honestly. Right? Where is the authenticity of the bits?
Or like the first printing of a book versus the 50th.
Yeah. I mean, the first edition. So I'm sure people are going to start getting into that. Right? Then you have to do if you do a hash on it, it's exactly the same hash. It's on a 5 1/4 of the same sort. It's this, I don't know.
So does the museum, the collection, have a plan to survive Paul Allen?
Yes, we do have a plan to survive Paul Allen. In fact, we're working on different types of funding. We have a 100-year plan. So we're working against a 100-year plan, and it is going to survive after Paul Allen. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Well, it's important.
The machines that you mentioned in your collection are probably unique. I mean, in terms of being operable, I would imagine you might have the only working interdata, maybe the only working Bendix G15. I haven't gone to check, but I haven't heard of anybody else that's got one that works. How feasible is it to keep some of these things working, particularly, for example, a tube computer where you've got essentially consumable tubes in it? And what are the rarest ones that you've got that you're still motivated to keep running?
These things are turning out to be remarkably robust. You can find a Commodore 64 and it's going to run. Maybe, if you replace the capacitors, right? Is it the same computer? This gets into that philosophy thing again.
Well, Commodore replaced them, so it's got to be okay.
So we kind of have a general principle of like, if an engineer at that time did this to restore the computer, then we would do it, right? You put in a better power supply, right? Your car is still the same car when you change your tires.
But can you keep Bendix G15 running? Or do the tubes die? I mean, can you run larger tubes?
Tubes are still available.
Yes.
The thing with the Bendix now, it's got germanium diodes, right? Every one of those, it's got the tube modules, and every one of those modules, so there's tubes sticking in the end, and there's a little board that's got some stuff on it. And all 3,297 of these germanium diodes had to be replaced with silicon diodes because they're all,
Broke down.
there's something about germanium that it just doesn't last. So it physically won't work anymore. So now it's got all these fresh diodes in it. So
And fresh tubes as well, I assume.
not yet. A lot of them still work. Yeah.
Well, I would suspect that the drum is a major issue.
The drum, amazingly enough, is really well sealed. And you just had to oil the bearings a little bit, and it's twirling around and reading, and the timing track is there. It's kind of amazing. Wow.
Okay, there's a website of a fellow whose drum was scored.
Drum was scored, yeah. Yeah, so that's definitely Those drums are great. All right.
One more. Have your engineers identified where the break-off would be in die manufacture of either the CPU or peripheral chips on when lead was discontinued and tin whiskers were going on? And was this coinciding with Rojas?
You have transcended my knowledge.
Rojas' removal of hazardous substances in around 1990, the European community sent down Altair and mercury, cadmium, you know, but the 286s and I believe the 386s and maybe even part of the 486s all had lead as the interconnecting from the die to the outside world of your legs to put the chip in. When we went to tin whiskers, stuff will fail without warning because tin still creeps on crystalline structure.
Keith Perez, one of our engineers, is particularly good with these kind of materials questions. And you would have to ask him more about that. It sounds familiar, these whiskers. Certainly, I try not to lick my fingers too much.
Because the older technology, if you're getting it running typically after 48 hours of manufacture, it'll keep on sailing. So, and as you said, tube manufacture is still fairly robust and still is running.
Yeah.
So, just wondered whether they looked and say now, these machines with tin whiskers, we have to be a little bit more observant of what may happen with them without warning. All of a sudden, give the magic smoke.
Yeah.
Do you foresee, I guess, younger people that are going to be attending this weekend and all that, do you foresee that sort of being a quasi-career to be a computer historian, and particularly an engineer, to be able to keep this stuff working in the future?
You know, I am churning students through the collection right now from the University of Washington and other schools. There's not that many, but there's a few who are interested, and so they're coming through and we're trying to train them in some way or another according to their interests. So I think, I don't know if it's going to pay as much as being a software engineer at Google or something, but I think that it is a viable way to go, at least it requires that passion, I think. So I want to thank you very much. I'm going to be here all weekend, hanging out, looking at everything.